think it's finally time to share this story, one I have written down over and over again, always trying to explain it better. I've almost memorized it by now, but today I finally feel ready to share this chapter of my life. Today, I am fortunate to live here in Chicago and to give my family and my mother the life they deserve. But when my siblings and I were children, we had a very rough time. We lived in a small, remote town lost in the Sierra Madre mountains. I wouldn't change anything about my childhood because it made me the man I am today. But I know my mother suffered greatly because she couldn't give us what we needed. When I was 10 years old, I became the man of the house. I started looking for work, helping at the butcher shop in our neighborhood, and when my mom went to work, I stayed home taking care of my little siblings. My dad came home whenever he wanted, always with the promise that he was about to find a job or that he would soon sell the little piece of land his grandfather had left him. But mostly, he came home to steal coins from my piggy bank to go out drinking. But one time, something more happened, and that's where my experience begins, when I realized that all the legends they told in the town were true. That August night, I had to go out looking for my father because he had promised to get the money for school enrollment. But it had been days since we'd last seen him at home, let alone in the village. One of his best friends, his compadre, the godfather of my little sister, called my mom. He said he had lent my dad the money and wanted to make sure it had reached us and hadn't just been spent on a bottle along the way. But my dad hadn't shown up, and we had little time left to find him and recover whatever money he had left. My mom wrapped her shawl around herself, opened the door, and was determined to go find him. But it was already nighttime, nearly 10 o'clock, and there was a cold wind outside that I knew she couldn't handle. "Let me go, Mom," I said. "I promise I'll find him and bring him back." My mom gave me her blessing and let me go. She made me promise I wouldn't wander into the woods and that if I didn't find him soon, I'd come right back, that I wouldn't go too far. So, running through that wind, which felt like it was straight out of a horror movie, I arrived at the village store where some of the local drunks gathered. I asked if they had seen my dad, and they told me he had mentioned the day before that he was going to ask for a favor in San Ignacio, a small town about an hour's walk away. But I was good at running, so I thought I could get there in half an hour if I hurried. Without even thanking them, I took off running while those drunks laughed at me, or maybe at my dad, I don't know. As I ran, I heard footsteps behind me. Someone was following me. To my surprise, they didn't tire and stayed close behind. I was already on that dark path when I felt I had to turn around to see who it was and what they wanted. I stopped suddenly, turned around, and saw nothing. Even though I had heard footsteps, there was no one there. Then I heard rustling in the bushes, as if someone was trying to hide. "What do you want, Tomas?" I asked. Tomas was a 14-year-old boy who used to bully me back then. He would chase me all the way home just for passing by his street, which was on my route. He was crazy. He used to kill small animals, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he lost it completely and tried something on me or one of my friends. Whenever he chased me, he'd show off a rusty little knife he had found somewhere. Something moved among the branches, and I knew it wasn't Tomas. Then I heard what sounded like someone singing a lullaby in the distance, as if the voice was coming from the village. It was a lullaby my mom used to sing to us when we were little, but the way it echoed, fading into the distance, was terrifying. I decided to keep running, trying not to think about what I had just heard. I didn't believe in the stories the older people told in the village. They were just ghost stories to scare the kids, or so I thought. I wasn't far from San Ignacio. The full moon lit up the path well enough, but something strange happened. Suddenly, that lullaby voice grew louder, closer, as if someone were singing right there, hidden among the trees. The voice sounded exactly like my mom's, which made me feel even more uneasy. It didn't feel like a good sign. I ran as fast as I could, like my soul was on fire. When I finally reached San Ignacio, it wasn't hard to figure out where to look for my dad. The only light in the whole village at that hour came from a neon sign outside a cantina. It glowed brightly, advertising the price of a caguama, a large beer bottle, and letting everyone know they were open until sunrise. That place was called El Refugio, the Refuge. I walked in, a scrawny 10-year-old who looked more like an 8-year-old because of my small size. I can only imagine how odd I must have looked, pushing past the drunk men to find my dad. I approached the bartender and asked him if he had seen my father. "Sure," he said, "but not since yesterday. He came by with his compadre, bought a beer, then started chatting with a woman. After that, he left with her, headed toward Las Portas." Damn it, I thought. Las Portas was a nearby settlement not too far away, but no one went there except the people who lived there. The path to get there was awful, full of potholes that turned into puddles whenever it rained. Nobody who lived in those 50 little houses had a car, and nobody else cared that it was almost impossible to reach. As I stood there thinking about all of this, I felt someone watching me. I turned and saw an old woman dressed entirely in black, sitting in a corner of the cantina. She was staring at me, unblinking. I started to feel nervous, so I moved toward the door. That's when she got up, shuffled across the dirt floor, and grabbed my shoulders with her bony hands. She muttered something I couldn't understand in a language I didn't know. "Sorry, kid," said the bartender as he walked toward the door. "She says we're not letting you leave." The old woman tightened her grip on my shoulders, her fingers digging into my skin. Fear gripped me and I struggled to break free. Somehow, I managed to slip out of her grasp and ran for the door. I didn't look back as I sprinted out of the cantina. I veered off the main path to throw them off, cutting through a few streets into the darkest part of the village. There, I hid among the trees beside a house without a fence. I didn't know where my dad's compadre lived, and even if I had, I wouldn't have gone to ask for help. I was too ashamed of wandering around looking for my drunk father. I sat down and started to cry. I was still just a kid, after all, and sometimes I needed to let it out. But I always made sure no one could see me. Not my mom, not anyone. "This is no night to be roaming the roads," the old man from the cantina had said as I bolted out the door. No one stopped me. Not the bartender, not any of the drunks in the cantina. Still, I knew I had to keep going, no matter how scared I was. There was no time to waste. I returned to the main road and passed by the cantina again. This time, I stopped to check if the coast was clear. I peeked around the corner and didn't see anyone. The path ahead seemed clear. But then, under the glow of that awful neon sign, I saw the silhouette of someone. A woman. She stood completely still, her hands clasped to her chest, staring straight at the path. As if she sensed me watching her, the woman turned. It wasn't a normal movement. She bounced slightly, as if her feet were tied together. Then she started walking toward me. I couldn't see her face, and I didn't want to. I didn't need to. Before she could step into the light, I had already turned and started running again. Soon, I reached the beginning of the rough road that led to Las Portas. The trees around the path were so dense that even the full moon's light couldn't get through. I had to slow down, walking carefully because I couldn't see where I was stepping. And then I heard it again. Footsteps behind me. They matched my pace, never too far away. In that moment, I almost wished it was the strange woman from earlier. At least I would know what I was dealing with. But something told me it wasn't her. I felt like I had just escaped from the cantina, whether it was from the old man, the old woman, or something else. I was sure I'd saved myself from being one of those kids who left on an errand and never came back. Unfortunately, that wasn't uncommon in those parts. I kept moving slowly, despite the fear, knowing my mom was probably worried sick by now. But I had gone too far to turn back without my father. I heard something behind me, so I started running. I wasn't even sure if I was still on the path anymore. Suddenly, I ran straight into a tree in the darkness. The full moon couldn't light up anything beneath that thick canopy. Then I felt something very close to me, as if it was trying to grab me from behind. I ducked just in time, feeling only the rush of air against my back. Whatever it was then moved into the trees, crashing through them like something big. I kept running, and I could hear it running alongside me. Up ahead, the path became clearer as the branches thinned out. I spotted a figure faintly illuminated by a dim lantern. It was an old man riding a small, equally tired-looking donkey. He stopped when he saw me running toward him. I honestly thought I was imagining him. "How much further to Las Portas, sir?" I asked. The old man, sweating profusely despite the cool night, gave me a strange look. "Hop on," he said. "I'll take you there. It's no time for a kid to be wandering these roads alone." Everything about this man felt off, just like the people in the cantina at San Ignacio. I knew I shouldn't trust him. "No, thank you," I replied. The man dismounted and pulled out a machete, its blade reflecting the moonlight into my face. He brought it uncomfortably close to me and said slowly, "You can stay here if you want, but take this machete with you, though I wouldn't recommend it." Then he handed me the reins of the donkey and pointed to the top of a tree just off the path. "Look up there," he said. I hesitated but eventually turned around. In the tree's canopy I saw her, the woman from the cantina. She was perched on a branch so thin it shouldn't have been able to hold even a bird. She was standing completely still, her dress tightly wrapped around her ankles as though binding her feet together. "Hop on," the man repeated. "It's not far now." I climbed onto the donkey, and the old man walked beside us, singing a cheerful tune. It was a song I somehow knew, a melody that calmed me even if just for a little while. Eventually, we reached Las Puertas. I asked him about the local cantina, assuming that's where I'd find my dad. "There's no cantina here," he replied. Then he pointed to the house of one of the town's lowlifes. "You'll always find someone there who's looking to drink and get lost." After that, he continued down the path, leaving me there. I went to the house he had pointed out. Inside, I found my father lying on the floor, surrounded by other drunks and in the arms of a woman as lost as he was. I managed to wake him up. I'll never forget the look of shame in his eyes as he started to cry. "I can't believe you came all the way here to find me," he said. "How much of the money did you spend?" I asked angrily. "Not much," he mumbled, searching through his pockets. "Let's just go home," he said. I helped him to his feet and supported him as we walked back to the path. That's when we saw her again, the woman from the tree. She walked past us, her feet now visibly tied together, but this time she wasn't hopping. She was floating about a meter above the ground. My dad stopped dead in his tracks. "We can't leave right now," he said, as if he understood something I didn't. "We have to," I replied. "Mom's waiting for us, and if you stay, I'll be left alone." Suddenly, we heard the sound of banging metal in the distance, followed by the faint glow of headlights. A battered old car, barely holding together, approached us on the path. It was the man from the cantina. "I sent Dona Jessicita to get you," he said to my dad. "She lent me her car to come fetch you too." We climbed into the car without a word, driving in silence down that dark, bumpy path. The windows were rolled down, letting in the night air. When we finally got home, it was 3 a.m., but my mom had a hot meal waiting for us. She even served the man who brought us back, giving him a bowl of soup to warm up. I looked at my mom and said, "I found him like I promised." Her eyes filled with pride and gratitude, and I knew that from that night on, she would never be alone again. Before leaving, the man whispered something to my mom. My dad was already asleep by then, and I never found out what he said, though I often wondered. A few days later, my dad, in one of his rare sober moments, asked my mom where I had gotten the machete. I was close enough to hear and walked over to answer him. "It's mine," I said. "I was given it to protect myself when I went to look for you." His expression changed immediately, his eyes welling with tears before narrowing in anger. "Don't lie to me, boy. Tell me where you got it." "This machete belonged to my grandfather. Look, it has his initials carved into the handle. When he fell off that cliff with his donkey, we searched for days before finding his body. The machete and his satchel were gone. Someone must have stolen them instead of helping him." I thought about describing the old man, but I decided not to. "He's just someone I met," I said. "My father always believed that I had run into some thief on the road that night, but I was certain it was something else entirely. That machete was mine now, but when we finally left the village, I decided to leave it behind in my dad's house. I wouldn't need it anymore, but he might. Maybe it would help him on his journey someday." Later, during one of those nights when all the village spirits were said to roam freely, my mother, my siblings, and I finally left the village for good. I don't know what became of the machete or the man, but I often think of those events. My mother never told us much about the strange days that followed our return. I remember waking up early one morning around 5:30 and overhearing a conversation between her and the woman in black, the one who had stood in the tree. She was saying goodbye as she left our house. My mom used to wake us up with strange teas during those days. Teas she never explained the purpose of. I still don't know what they were for. A few days later, when my father was sober, he approached my mom again about the machete. This time I stayed quiet. The thought of telling him about the old man lingered, but I realized it wouldn't matter. That machete had belonged to my grandfather, carved with his initials, the same initials as my father's. That night, I understood one thing. Whatever had helped me, whatever had guided me on that dangerous path, wasn't from this world. The old man, the woman in black, the spirits of the cantina, each was part of a story my family would never forget. Even now, I wonder about that machete. Maybe it wasn't just a tool for survival, but a connection to something much older, deeper, and more mysterious than I'll ever understand.